The idea is that I try and take you through the stages before I start pulling them apart. I'll start with 4-stroke because that's simpler to understand than 2-stroke. 4-stroke motor in this configuration, that configuration, has been around for 135-6 years, virtually unchanged, which just shows basically what a good design it is. It's very simple. People talk about 4 strokes and 2 strokes. Just get one thing into your head. Whichever way it goes, there's always 4 phases. Always. 2-stroke has 4 phases. It just happens to compress them into 2 strokes of the piston. But there are 4 distinct phases. Induction, that's getting your fuel in the right mixture into a place where it can burn. Compression, that's getting it compressed enough and hot enough to actually have a controlled explosion. The combustion stroke, or phase, where it actually develops the energy, and the exhaust phase. They've all got, even a Frankel engine, a rotary, has those 4 phases. They just happen in a different sequence. So, if you consider that end to be the carburettor and that end to be the exhaust, okay, do you want to come a bit closer, Keith, because you particularly wanted to have a look at this? Right, these poppet valves just represent the valves that are in the top of there, okay? So, if you're flicking it that way, as you will do, we'll consider it going that way, okay? And we just happen to start there, okay? So, the first phase is induction, okay? The inlet valve opens. It opens more smoothly than I'm pushing it, but it opens, right? Fuel and air mixture is drawn in to the cylinder. It closes. It compresses it enormously. The glow plug fires it, so then you get the energy of the combustion stroke and then the exhaust stroke. The exhaust valve opens, pushes the lot out that side. Okay, the inlet valve opens again. Induction, compression, firing, exhaust. It's that simple. It's a very simple piece of kit. It's almost unaltered for 130 years. It's been refined, enormously refined. Fuel's been refined. The ways of getting the mixture in have been refined, but basically that's what it does. It's as simple as that. And these ones do exactly that. Okay. The timing, what makes those things open and close at the right time, is done by a camshaft, which is mechanically connected to that in a certain speed ratio, 2 to 1, basically. The valves can either be pushed open by push rods from the camshaft at the bottom, like these are, or from camshafts at the top directly operating on top of the poppet valves. So, by all means, and especially when I start undoing them, fire any questions at me that you want, because it's quite boring watching me undo screws. You know, a lot more complex to understand. Okay, let's start it on an induction stroke. Right? If you look at this thing, it's got a hollow, or partially hollow, crankshaft, where the fuel goes in through the carburettor, into the crankshaft, into the bottom of the crankcase. Okay, so that is part of the timing. The position of that slot in the crankshaft is part of the timing. Again, we're going that way. Okay, so bear in mind what I said. There's several things going on at once. I'm at this moment ignoring what's going on up there. We'll come to that later. So as that edge passes the opening of the carburettor, notice the piston's going up. There's a partial vacuum. That port is closed. There's a partial vacuum occurring inside the crankshaft, in the crankcase. Okay, so as that opens, fuel and air mixture rushes in from the carburetor into the crankcase. It can't get anywhere else. It stays in the crankcase. Okay? It then gets compressed in the crankcase. That valve is now closed. Okay? That slice that's cut out of the crankshaft is closed. So it's now being compressed inside the crankcase. If you watch the top of that piston, that's what's called the transfer port. As it comes down past there, all that compression is released and rushes up into the top. Okay, so you've got fuel and air mixture up in the top. Round again, starts compressing. Notice the exhaust valve still slightly open. Starts compressing there. Compresses enough for the glow plug to fire it. Firing stroke and exhaust out of there. Now, whilst that's happening, whilst the firing stroke and the exhaust are happening, it's also compressing the next stroke in there. Okay? So that, whilst it's called a two-cycle or two-stroke engine, there's 4 different phases going on at once. So at any time, the whole 4 phases happen in one up and one down of the piston. Whereas on a 4-stroke, it takes 2 full revolutions, 1 firing stroke. This takes 1 full revolution for 1 firing stroke. You all okay with that? Happy with that?
Fantastic.
Fantastic. That's the way they work. These are a lot more complex to understand than those, because there's too much going on at once. Right, we'll start with the 2-stroke. I've chosen conventional engines. When I say conventional, they're the sort of cooking engines that you drive sport planes with. Nothing fancy, not racing engines, not pumped engines, because most of you won't have a pumped engine anyway. And I couldn't strip one of those in the time allowed to me. Nor supercharged ones. There's some of these have an actual secondary pump driven by the push rods, which actually does an extra bit of compression and pushes fuel in. The YS series do that. But it's all a basic cooking engine. Now, any of you got any idea when you would strip an engine? Why would you even want to?
Get the
Because
coast
it's
cut.
got a bit of dirt in it when you've had a little nosedive.
When you've had a nosedive, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
When you get water in it.
No, you don't need to strip it then. Just put proper fuel in it, fire it up. No problem. No problem. Have you ever heard of water injection? It works well. Yeah, you expected it to, and this can be quite a gradual thing. But you'll be down the field one time and you think, bloody hell, that's crap. It's not working right.
Why?
Why? And in its usual cases, it's worn out. And I'll show you what wears out in a minute. So there are 3. When it starts slowing down, when it's obviously damaged, something's just stopped. Then, when you've crashed it, the other time, oddly enough, is the very first time you take it out of the box. Just take the head off and the back plate off and run some solvent through. Now, it's not so critical nowadays, but a few years ago, you'd be astonished what crap came out of a brand new engine, and it's not the sort of thing you want flying around at 12,000 RPM up and down the side of your piston. You don't want it. So that's the other time. Just the head and the back plate. Squirt solvent in it. When I'm talking solvent, petrol's good, but you need to keep petrol away from rubber bits. Acetone's very, very good if you can get hold of it. It dries a bit too quick to be useful after you've used it, but it's good in a bath. You drop bits in it. Meths is good. It's not very good at, it's good at degreasing, and it's quite slow evaporating. Diesel's quite good. Diesel fuel is very good. Sorry?
So no siphoning you don't.
No siphoning you don't. Diesel's quite good. Again, diesel, you've got to get anything which is based on paraffin or a fraction of oil needs to be kept away from rubber, otherwise you'll perish it and replacing it. Okay. So we come to the two-stroke. You've decided you want to take it apart, and you get the carburettor out of the way. I just hope I've brought sufficient tools with me tonight.
It's more fun if you
I've bought the bare minimum. Last time I brought a huge case of tools. I didn't need hardly any of them. You need clean paper. You need, ordinarily I'd have solvent in this, but the management don't take too kindly to solvent. Take your carburettor out. The carburettor will either be on a pinch bolt or two little bolts going inside. It may even be a two-part pinch bolt, but it will just pull out. Okay. And then take the back plate off. If I can find, if I can screw that in this. Now, when you take the back plate off, in this one it doesn't particularly matter because it's completely symmetrical. Some you will find have sort of a bulkhead in there. That's for clearance for the piston. That's the designer has allowed the piston to come down below the top of that. If you put it back the wrong way, the first time you flick it, it will smash. Definitely. So just keep it out of the way. What I usually do is put a mark on the top of there. I've put the mark. So, yeah, they can be. They can be. There can be a paper gasket in the back of there. Well, it'll either be a paper one or a PTFE one or a rubber ring.
That's what they favour these days.
Yeah, rubber ring.
Big
The reason they have one is because it's so important that that crankcase is completely sealed. Otherwise, you don't get the compression in the crankcase that's necessary to blast it up there into the head. I'll just natter quickly about glow plugs whilst I'm doing this. I don't know if you're obviously aware that the glow plug glows all the time. It doesn't go out, it glows all the time. So you might be thinking, why does it only fire at one particular point? The physics and the chemistry of it is that only when you've got that fuel-air mixture at a certain compression will it ignite at that temperature, and it's carefully controlled. You have hot plugs and you have cold plugs. A hot plug, basically, you've probably heard the terms. A hot plug is one that stays hot longer. That's all it means. It doesn't burn, it doesn't glow any hotter. It stays hot for longer. Four-strokes have hot plugs in them because it's got to stay glowing for a completely dead cycle whilst it inlets and exhausts. High-performance two-strokes have quite a cold plug in them because they don't need to stay hot very long. And if they're doing 13, 14, 15,000 RPM, there's very, very little time for it to cool down. There, just before the top, it will fire halfway down. And you'll get a very lumpy, banging sort of noise out of it.
You can hear it.
Yeah, you can hear it.
Well, the exhaust
it's called
is
pre-ignition. You can hear things apart. They're quite simple. The other thing I would say to you is don't throw your broken props away. They can be quite useful. I always keep a broken prop beside. They're very good scrapers as well. Paint mixers, all sorts. So they're good for this sort of thing. The next thing you need to do is get the piston and liner out. That, on a two-stroke, can be relatively easy because you've got all sorts of ports in there that you can see. You've got an exhaust port, you've got main transfer port, and two other ports called boost ports or Schnurl ports. The purpose of those things is to alter the pattern of fuel going into the cylinder head to get, that's just one of the refinements I was talking about. If you've got a fairly tough finger, you can put it down there. Right? You can stick it down there, poke it into one of the ports and turn the prop. If, however, it's quite stiff on there, you may hurt your finger. But some of them will come out like that. We'll just have another try.
4 pints, please.
No, it won't. Right, so that won't come out. We have a little trick under our sleeves for that. Some bits of wood. Just get a couple of little bits of wood. One may do the trick. I'll try one first. Lower the piston till you can see the ports. Drop one of those pieces of wood on top of it. Slide it into the port. Don't do it with steel or anything like that, just do it with wood. Slide it into the port like that, and then turn the prop. Out it comes. Doddle. And that will happen. It will always happen. If it's really reluctant, you may have to stick it in the oven. If you stick it in the oven, make sure you've got an understanding partner. No more than 5 minutes, gas mark 6 or 180 centigrade. Seriously, gas mark 6, 5 minutes. If you go any longer than that, that's the wrong sort of rate. What you want is the outer bits to expand early.
You can't use a microwave then?
You can't. No, don't put metal in a microwave anyway.
Firework display.
Yeah, I have done it with hot air paint stripper actually.
Say?
I have done it with a hot air paint stripper.
A hot air paint stripper, yeah. There's nothing wrong with that because that localises the heat and expands the outer bit. Yeah. Right. You've taken the piston from the liner from around the piston. Hopefully now the piston will have enough sideways play to pop out. It will pop out like so. It will pop out like so. And slide up out to the top. Don't let go of it yet, because that's the way it came out. You will find, under most circumstances, a bigger chamfer on one side than the other. The side with the large chamfer goes towards the crankshaft. It's clearance. Okay. This one actually is symmetrical. So the only telltale, if you just pass it around, there's a little hole there. That hole is to lubricate the big end, and it's at the. It will be pointing towards the inlet end because that's where the oil fuel mixture is coming in. Okay. That if you put it in a Woodruff key and a plain shaft or a tapered shaft with a collet like this. Ordinarily they would be tight, but I made sure this one wasn't. The worst thing I can do is stand up here and fail to get it apart. So I made sure this came apart. I make myself a little tool that grabs that, a little puller, just a little puller to pop it off. It's not very hard. It's quite a coarse taper. So out comes the prop driver, and out comes the crankshaft. Right, now that's as far as this is coming apart tonight. I'm not going to take the bearings out because I haven't got my oven here. If you want the bearings out, again, that's quite simple. Gas mark 6 for 5 minutes. 200 centigrade. Make sure you've got an asbestos glove and a sharp wrap like that, and it'll fall out.
How many bearings are in there?
There's 2.
There's 2. One at the back.
One at the back, one at the front. That one will fall out.
Yeah.
Then you need something, a mandrel, any piece of aluminium, something like that, to push through and knock the front bearing out.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's in bits. That's as far as you can get it. Now, what you're looking for, quite a few on that.
You can buy them.
You can buy the piston liner sets. Yes.
Yeah.
It's experience.
So you don't have.
You've got lovely brand new bearings.
Yeah.
That's a nice fit on there. It always will be. So I tend to have little tools that I've made for the job. They're just hollow bits. You can use bits out of a socket set if you want. They do just as good. But I prefer to use aluminium bits and brass bits on steel so as I don't damage it. You will pop the bearing on there. Okay, with a cylindrical bit of kit, as I said, something you make or a socket, you tap it down flat. That will sit firmly on that shaft and butted up against that face. So you've got the shaft with one bearing on, and a crankcase with no bearings in. Right? Oven.
Yeah.
Gas mark 6, 5 minutes, 200 degrees centigrade. Again, I've made myself some little mandrels that can sit on, but it's not vital. You can have a little wooden block that sits on if you want, but you need to sit that on it. So that sits on, bear in mind that's hot and you're jiggling it around like crazy. You've got a pair of gloves on. That, at the right temperature, will absolutely fall into there. It just drops straight in, right? You've got it straight in, it's still hot, you will have to work quickly. Straight on. The front bearing, you just then drop over there. Again, a piece of tubing, which is smaller than the hole it's going in, obviously, and bigger than the inner bearing. Just put it on there, put the prop driver on, tighten it all up, give it a little tap, not on the end of the thread, as somebody did, or I did this sort, not on the end of the thread, on the end of the nut, give it a little tap, and leave it to cool down. And that's your bearings aligned. And they'll be lovely. You just spin them after that. They'll be beautiful. In fact, I sometimes take a motor apart just to align the bearings again. It's quite a pleasant experience. It's very therapeutic. Anyway, your bearings are back in now. Putting it back together is just a reverse of what you did before, although there are some slightly tricky bits. You get your piston and you make sure it's the right way you decided. Drop it in there, and that should go on the top. That's a little bit fiddly, but that's it over the big end. And then you've got to get, who's got my liner? Right, the liner. The biggest port will be the exhaust port. That has to line up with that. So, in most cases, it'll have a mark already notched in it. Most liners have that mark. If they haven't, again, the biggest port will be the exhaust always. Right, you've got to start it in there and then jiggle it slightly until the piston goes into it. It's just a little bit of a jiggle and it will go in. Otherwise you've got to take it out again and line it up, pop it back in, head back on. I'm not going to put it on, so you'll just be watching me do bolts up again. Head back on, back plate back on, carburetor back on. I'll go through carburetor same as the Otto system. You will recognise its shape. Okay. Again, we've got to get rid of the carburetor. So that should come off. And I will reassemble this one. If I've got, yes, I've got time. And thank you to Stan for this motor. This one actually does deserve to be taken apart because it's got a smashed camshaft in it. I don't know how he smashed the camshaft, but it has. It was quite a new motor as well, wasn't it?
Brand new.
Brand new.
Wasn't one that Brian had, was it?
No.
What is it, I guess?
ASP.
Aero.
Yeah. Is it ASP? SC.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the first time we run it up, that plate come off.
Right, dear.
Within about 2 minutes of it.
dear.
Oh.
I would have had that back to the supplier straight away. Right, carburetor's come off. You will almost certainly find a gasket in there. Look after it. It's not absolutely critical. You can. There's a stuff you can buy from motor shops called instant gasket, which is a silicone thing. This is a fairly cool part of the motor, and it'll work very, very well in there. Okay, so the carburetor's off. The next thing we want to do is take the rocker box off, which will hide
Liven things up a bit.
I know.
The blur.
Right,
Screen.
we've got a nice little pair of valves in there, which we need to get off before we can get the head off. Okay, so off it comes. Take the whole valve assembly off at once, the whole rocker assembly. the whole thing comes off. At this stage, there's no point taking that any further apart. None whatsoever.
No springs in there, then it's just
The springs are there,
oh, sorry.
on top of the valves.
Yeah. Okay.
That's just the rocker assembly.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, the head can now come off. But before we do that, there's a couple of loose bits in there, the push rods that operate the valves. It's nice to put them back where they came from, because even with the precision that these engines are made, they will be slightly different lengths. I'm not going to bother tonight, I'm just going to chuck them in there. Because
Is that because it stands?
that's because it stands. That's because it stands. That's because it's knackered. And if you really want to, put that in your left hand, that in your right, and don't confuse me when we come back. But they're both going in there. However, it doesn't really invariably bolt inside there. Don't forget it. There's always one hidden. And I do apologise if this is a little bit rushed, but it's a lot easier on my bench.
But it is now.
It is now. Right,
You can't buy another can for it.
off
then.
comes the head.
It's broken, isn't it?
Sorry?
Is the camshaft
Yeah,
broken?
well, it's knackered. Off comes the head. There's a couple of bits that will fall out now, and that's those tubes here. They will fall out. The head can come straight off. It's done. Should. Right, I'm not going to take the valves out because I need a really clean bench to do that, because if anything pops out of there, I'm not going to find it.
Yeah.
But there's a little sea washer in there. All you need to do is compress that spring, pull the sea washer out, and you can get the valve out. Just like a car. Exactly like a car. So you can pass that round.
Yeah,
Quite happy.
Can't you just replace the camshaft?
You can, but then it doesn't become my demo engine anymore.
You can
It
give
becomes
away.
standard running motor.
Is it feasible?
Yeah, oh yeah, it's perfectly feasible. Yeah, you can replace the camshaft.
Did you tell him you could never replace
I did.
it?
That's precisely what I
He
told
couldn't
him.
get a spare.
Don't get them out now.
No, I
They'll come
thought
out
it
later.
grieves you. The double spring and the sea washers, they can fly miles.
Absolutely everywhere. The
Do it,
So
so
it
it
like
like
back.
back.
plastic bag.
I do inside a poly,
Yeah.
Tupperware box.
I must admit, I didn't offer to take the piston pin out of the two-stroke, because that's held in with a couple of tiny circlets in the piston. Now, they come out easily enough. They don't go back very easily. They can do. They can go back. Crankcase compression in this.
Yeah.
It doesn't rely on crankcase compression to push the gas up. Everything happens in the top, not in the bottom. So we have a perfectly plain. You'll be presented with a perfectly plain liner, and you think, how the bloody hell is that going to come out? Because I can't put bits of wood in it. Well, here you're going to have to make a little mandrel and tap it out. Get the piston out of the way, and hopefully this will work.
And a little knock-on-meter.
And a little knock-o-meter. On my bench, I would have that sitting on a suitable cylinder, so I can just tap it gently. But hopefully I'm going to tap it here. Thank God for that. That's all the work today. That was worth it. Okay, exactly the same as the two-stroke. You pull this liner out, and you can have a look at that. That's in excellent condition. It's brand new, spanking new. Now we come to a tricky bit. Because there is no means of, like there was in the two-stroke, on almost all these things you'll find a hole. You've perhaps noticed it, a little hole in the back. Now, that hole is completely sealed when the liner's in, and the purpose of that is so that you can get the piston off the conrod. And it will be, in most of the engines you'll come across, I mean there are other ones where you'll unscrew the piston and take the piston off. They're much easier, but they're few and far between. And I should have in here, a little bit of wire.
Oh,
Yeah, if you look inside there, there's a little PTFE button. The way these things are organised is that the wrist pin, when it, yeah, and out comes the wrist pin with that attached to it. Sometimes that will come out and you've got